Ever realized how crazy our ideas get when we're pushed into a corner? It's not surprising, since most of us would do anything to survive. While Mother Nature is no pushover and can dish out some crazy destruction in the form of floods, hurricanes, forest fires, or tsunamis, there are some homeowners who just didn't want to stand idle, but did something about it. These are stories of such people who were called crazy for thinking outside the box, but ultimately had the last laugh. But before we get to it, be sure to smash the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell for more future content. Here we go. Victoria's Vicksburg. When it comes to protecting one's property, the residents at Vicksburg, Mississippi showed how serious they were about this matter. The thing is, the residents of Vicksburg are situated along the Yazoo River, which serves as a tributary to the famous Mississippi River. Though locals take comfort in the fact that Vicksburg is a 100-year-old flood area, the reports of heavy rainfall hundreds of miles upstream was not a good sign for the residents. The levees around the water body are usually good enough to deal with any rising tides, but the new weather conditions seem to indicate that this barrier wouldn't be enough when the time came. Wasting no time or taking any chances, the residents got busy and started building their own levees around their own plots. They built donut-shaped embankments around the houses and sometimes even cut off roads leading in and out of the property. The site was met with ridicule, and other residents felt that it was overkill. But when the inevitable happened, it was too late for the less prepared. Both the Mississippi and the Yazoo River burst their banks with record-breaking crests. The Vicksburg Point reached an unprecedented 57.1 feet, which ultimately pushed the Yazoo to flow out of its banks and started flooding the area. Many of the low-lying areas found themselves completely submerged, but the cautious homeowners with the makeshift levees were completely untouched by this calamity. Though an object of mockery at first, these homes with embankments soon became a sight of envy. The eye of the storm. If you're living in an area prone to hurricanes or extreme weather, you can never be too prepared. Mother Nature is always great at throwing us a curveball. Back in 1989, designer George Pool's parents lost their wonderful summer home to Hurricane Hugo. The home being on the southeastern stretch of the US, hurricanes are a fact of life in this part of the country. Having lived through that incident, George Pool wanted to construct a new home which would be able to withstand any future hurricanes, inevitably passing through there. His answer was this odd-looking dome-shaped home called the Eye of the Storm. While the neighbors might not relish living next to such an odd architectural abode, the design of his home proved extremely useful with all the hurricanes which came through there over the years. The process started with blowing up a giant inflatable device called an airform, which was blown up to a height of 37 feet. After the inflation stage, the insides were then sprayed with concrete and lined with steel. The result, a very hardy dome which can withstand hurricane forces. Since it's one single piece, there's a very low risk of anything being ripped away during a storm. The anti-hurricane construction doesn't just end with its dome shape. The basement contains 8 wide openings which lets the wind and water pass through easily without damaging the main housing areas upstairs. So, does it work? It does. It's withstood many hurricanes since then, including the Hurricane Florence in 2018. Would you live in such a home knowing that it looks odd but could protect you from most hurricanes? Let us know in the comments. The house fit for a king. Florida is no stranger to hurricanes, which is why this resident of Mexico Beach decided to construct this unique-looking home on the beachfront. Though it certainly looks different from others in the neighborhood, what makes this house special is the way it's constructed. The tilted house resulted from the vision of Dr. LeBron Lackey and his uncle Russell King, who wanted to build a house which could withstand the frequent hurricanes which pass through Florida. Initially, the construction of the house was ridiculed by the community for not adhering to Florida's strict building codes, which address hurricane resistance. But the homeowners didn't just throw caution to the wind and neglect these codes, they felt it was good enough to be implemented. They took matters into their own hands and introduced their own anti-hurricane measures, one of them being these 40-foot concrete pilings dug deep into the foundation to keep the house anchored down. The house is also buffered by a 1-foot thick concrete wall. It's like a small bunker in there. To make it even more hurricane resistant, they added over 3,000 hurricane clips to keep the roof intact during heavy storms, with winds reaching up to 250 miles per hour. Though these measures made the house an impregnable fortress against hurricanes, it still wasn't enough to go completely unscathed. The powerful tidal surges did manage to crack the concrete pillars and even rip out a portion of the stairs. But these are hardly any notable damages when compared to neighboring homes being reduced to rubble during Hurricane Michael in 2018. This home was definitely an idea crazy enough to work, and it did. How now, cowhouse? Architects often want to change up the status quo and sometimes venture into territories which are, if anything, questionable. The Spanish architecture firm called Ensemble managed to pull something worthwhile out of their little stroll off the beaten path. The firm wanted to create a concept home using concrete, lots of straw bales, and a cow. And before your mind starts wandering, we would like to say that no cows were harmed in the making of this experimental home. Ensemble dug up a piece of land on the coast of Costa de Morte and filled it with hay bales. Pretty strange move so far, but it doesn't end there. They then went on to cover up the hay and left it to cure for a whole year with concrete and soil. They then dig up this strange site, revealing a 1,700 cubic foot compact straw bale. The next step would never have crossed the mind of an architect before, but Ensemble brought in a calf called Paulina, who took on the job of feasting on all the hay. Once she was done with the job and many pounds heavier, what was left was an interesting environment-friendly space which could be converted into a truly interesting living space. Ensemble managed to construct this unique shape, which is a mix of earthy living space set among nature and with spectacular views. Looks like a perfect hermitage, far away from civilization and the noise. Raising the game. So far, we've covered homes which have been prepared to withstand natural calamities, but none of them are feasible on a larger scale. This unique home in Dhaka City, Bangladesh, is an example of a low-cost flood-resistant construction which could be built up for the poorer sections of the population who are most prone to flood damage. The lift house is the brainchild of Pritula Prasun, who devised this amphibious construction to keep the residents of this home safe from flooding. The two bamboo structures on either side are built on the hollow Ferrosment base, and portions of each bamboo frame were filled with over 8,000 used empty bottles. These two bamboo units are then mounted on either side of the central red brick core. What makes this design so ingenious is how it responds to flooding. When the water level rises up thanks to its empty bottle-filled base, the entire structure rises and floats on top of the water while being anchored to the central brick structure. The residents are therefore kept high and dry up to a height of 12 feet. Once the water level recedes, the structure slowly settles back on the ground. Pritula's design is a game-changer in the architectural world and could potentially save countless lives and reduce flood damage by a huge margin. Foiled fire. Forest fires are a huge issue in the state of California, with estimated losses of $400 billion in 2018 alone. These uncontrolled fires are no joke. At the threat of potentially losing 5 historic cabins in the Sierra National Forest, the Fire Management Unit managed to save the cabins by dressing them up in a fire protective wrap made by a company called Firesat Incorporated. These shiny wraps are not exactly fireproof, but they are supposed to prevent embers and radiant heat from damaging the structures underneath it. Much to the relief of the officials, the cover actually protected the cabins and left them untouched. Thanks to the success of these fire wraps, various other fire management services started using it as a fire shield for their own cases, like the Crater Lake firefighters in 2017 and Yosemite services in 2018. But these fire shields are not cheap. It costs about $744 for a 50-pound roll, which can cover about 1,200 square feet. Not a big price to pay considering the damage that fires can cause. Safe space. What do you do if you live in the center of America's Tornado Alley? Have a safe room. Well, that's exactly what the Phillips family from Mississippi did. They bought their new home back in March 2020, and what made them narrow down on this particular one was the underground safe room. Mississippi being a state frequently ravaged by EF4 and EF5 level storms, this investment was a worthwhile one. Just a few weeks after the Phillips family moved into the new home, around 80 tornadoes swept across the state and wreaked havoc all around. As the storm closed in, the Phillips family managed to get inside the safe room in time. While they waited safely underneath for the storm to pass, the story upstairs was less than ideal. When it was safe enough to come out, they walked into an empty space which was once their home. The tornado ripped the home clean off its foundation, and now only parts of it remain. Though they lost their home, being cautious and getting a house with a safe room saved this family. And that's all that matters. A whole lot of judgment. Preppers have a reputation for being overly paranoid. At first, Wayne Martin might have seemed like any other prepper building an underground shelter. At least that's what it looks like for now, but Wayne has other plans. At first, he digs an 8-foot deep by 24-foot long ditch in his backyard. He later fills the bottom with 6 inches of peat and gravel. He then gets a company to lower his shipping container into this hole. He's made some modifications to it, like sealing up the back doors and replacing the front with regular doors. Then he installs a subterranean stair leading to this underground container from above. He then lays the top with steel beams and covers them up with corrugated metal sheets. He even goes and installs a water pump to keep the water out of this space, as well as installs air vents to bring in airflow. To seal the deal, he then pours concrete over the steel beams and covered it up with dirt and soil. But now you must be wondering that this has to be a panic room or an underground bunker. Well, yes and no. Wayne actually built this space to serve as a wine cellar. The cool temperature and lower humidity levels made it ideal for storing wine. But if the weather takes a turn for the worse, this wine cellar can also be used as a storm shelter as well. Good thinking, Wayne. Damn good. Randy Wagner from Brazoria County in Texas was one homeowner who wasn't going to give up and watch his family home being washed away by the incoming storm. While the county began to brace itself for the record-breaking storm in May 2016, the news was flooded with reports of rivers bursting from their banks, roads being washed off, and the increasing death toll. The residents were alarmed when they found out that the storm is heading their way and was just 100 miles away at a neighboring county called Brenham. It was reported that around 19 inches of rain had fallen and the storm was nowhere close to slowing down. Seeing the seriousness of the matter, Randy decided to scour the internet for something that could help him save his home. His search led him to a website called Aquadam, which sold huge watertight tubes which could be filled with water to serve as a temporary embankment around the house. The weight pressing down on the stored water is enough to be efficient against the incoming floods. Feeling a bit uncertain and weary, Randy decided to take a huge gamble and bought the setup. But before he could even begin working on flood-proofing his home, he had to make a 520-mile round trip to Louisiana to pick up the tube. The 30-inch tall 450-foot dam was not a cheap purchase. It burrowed an $8,300 hole in Randy's wallet. Upon reaching back home, Randy unloaded the 800-pound tubing. Within 3 days after his return, water started flooding the neighboring plots, and without a second to lose, Randy began to set up the makeshift dam around his home with the help of 2 others. Using gasoline pumps, he managed to inflate the tubes within half a day by using the water from a nearby ditch. Not surprisingly, the large plastic embankment caught the eye of neighbors and they were amused. They laughed at him and told him there's no way something like that was going to work. Randy paid no heed and waited out until the flooding came to him. By June, a presidential disaster declaration was issued as the local river Brazos slowly began to flood the area. Thousands of residents were forced to vacate their homes and abandon their belongings. News helicopters captured the footage of countless streets and neighborhoods being completely flooded, except one. I'm sure you can guess which one. Randy's home was untouched and looked like a floating island in the middle of the ocean of flooded homes. His plan actually worked, and he managed to save his home from utter destruction. The $8,300 saved him from a potential $150,000 worth of water damages. The neighbors who were laughing at his crazy plan had less than favorable situations. Reports say that more than 1,500 houses were destroyed and a damage worth $3.8 million was reported. Randy is essentially your modern-day Noah. And that's a wrap. Crazy ideas, but with surprising results. Who do you think had the craziest idea of them all? Let us know in the comments. If you like what you see, be sure to smash the like button, share and subscribe. Later.